Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. So believe it or not, it's been 7 months since we did our last tier list. I always try to wait a long time to do this to allow new paddles to come in so that there's, enough content to talk about. But then I wait too long and it ends up being almost a year. So yeah, we got a ton of new paddles to talk about today. I am just quickly going to remind you what a tier list is for those of you who don't know. A tier list is kind of like a grading system. So you'll see when I switch to the tier list here, there's an S tier, an A tier, a B tier, a C tier, and a D tier. S tier is the highest, kind of like an A plus in school, and then it goes down from there. It's pretty self-explanatory. And I do also want to say, if your paddle isn't in a high tier, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad paddle. That just means it doesn't perform quite as well as some other paddles from a technical standpoint. And I will talk about why they're in this specific tier. The other thing that I do with these tier lists is I kind of go off of what I had with the previous tier list, but I move every paddle down one, especially if I think there's been a big enough shift in the industry, which I definitely think there has been in the last 7 months. Now, I'm quickly going to go through every paddle and rearrange them if I think they need to be. The other thing I need to talk about is obviously all the controversy that's happened in pickleball in the last year with especially foam power paddles. You're gonna see a lot of paddles are missing here, some that I actually reviewed on the channel, like the Rhombus Ripple, for example. I'm not including it here because it's been delisted or it was never actually really listed. Now, just a quick comment on the Rhombus Ripple. I don't know if you saw on Rhombus's Instagram the other day, they are releasing the Ripple V2, which I am extremely excited about. If you saw my beta Ripple review, you'll know I was a really big fan of that paddle. So I can't wait till the V2 comes out, and I think we will be getting it. So that's exciting. But yeah, no paddles that have been delisted, and also no paddles that are being sunset on July 1st. So the Mod TA won't be here. The Pro Powers won't be here. I'm not including any of the original Gearbox Pro series just because they've pretty much been replaced now by the Pro Ultimate Power, and the Pro Ultimate Hyper. I'm also not going to include the Yola 3S paddles just because those kind of have been replaced at this point by the Pro 4s, and they weren't fully legal, I guess. They were just UPAA approved, and to make this tier list, I guess now I want full approval for the paddles. But yeah, that's about it for the introduction. Just wanted to set a few things straight. And I also, of course, want to remind you, as usual, that any of the paddles that we're going to talk about in this tier list, you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. And obviously, that brings me into another point. If you don't see your paddle here, or you don't see some popular paddles or whatever, I can only talk about the paddles that we carry at the store because those are the paddles that I get to test, and obviously we're a retail store. But of course, we are always looking to bring in new paddles, and we will be getting a lot of new paddles soon, which is kind of why I wanted to do this tier list now before it gets all over the top again. But yeah, if you do have a paddle you think we should bring in, please don't hesitate to suggest it. But now let's get into it, and we're going to switch to the tier list now of the paddles we ranked 7 months ago. All right, so as you can see, there's no paddles in the S tier. That's because I've moved all the paddles down one spot from where they were previously. But of course, I'm gonna go through and see if anything needs to be reorganized. So these A tier paddles were all solid S tier paddles for me in the past, but I think at this point, for example, a paddle like the Ruby is a fantastic paddle, but it does have certain limitations now considering where the game is in terms of performance, especially because of the rise of foam paddles that are soft but also add spring effect. There's more power, there's more spin. Control is technically maybe a little bit harder, but can also be really good on those paddles. So a paddle like the Ruby, these Kevlar paddles that really did push the needle in the past, I'm gonna move down into the A tier now. So Ruby, J2K, yeah, A tier paddles. The R1 Nova, in a way, is kind of similar to the Kevlar paddles, but instead of Kevlar softening it up and creating this unique feel, they had their own proprietary technology that allowed the paddle to flex a little bit more and feel softer, which was really positive for pocketing. You got good spin, good control, great feel. But for the same reasons I've got the Kevlar paddles in A tier, I'm gonna keep those down there. The Control Air Invicta, it's funny because there is one thing we need to talk about in the general pickleball industry right now, is that we're not seeing that many great control paddles coming out. So I almost want to move this into the S tier because if you want a pure control paddle, it is kind of the best right now, or it's one of the best, but we'll see if I keep that S tier by the end of the tier list. R2 Nova, same reason as the R1 Nova. The Pro Ultimate, I'm gonna move, into the S tier because this is, I guess classic foam power paddle, you could say now. A really, really good one. I have an easier time controlling this paddle than the Pro Ultimate Power. We'll see if I put it in a different tier, but this is a really, really good foam power paddle. One of the best right now. The Fat Boy, yeah, there's no way I can put this paddle as tier. Like, it's a good paddle. It's a great control paddle. That's kind of what it came out as, because it's a little bit wider, a little bit shorter. It's pretty soft, but it still has good spin because of its thermoform construction in Kevlar, but I just can't put it any higher than A tier. The J7K, the J3K. You know what? I'm actually going to move the J7K into the B tier, because the reason you go longer is because you want a little bit more leverage for power and spin, and you get so much power and spin with shorter paddles that you don't need to go longer. And there are drawbacks to going longer. It's not as maneuverable. It's not as quick. So yeah, I'm going to drop that into the B tier. The J3K is definitely still an A tier paddle. I love this shape with the long handle and the really short design. It's super quick. Shapeshifter, I was a huge fan of this technology when it came out. It's kind of similar in a way to the Novas, where it's a raw carbon paddle, but it is much more technologically impressive than, you know, classic thermoformed raw carbon paddles, just because it is a little bit softer. The spin is better because of that softer feel. You kind of grab onto the ball a little bit more. So that's still an A tier paddle for me. The Proline Energy S is, honestly, it could be on the same tier as the Ruby, J2K, and the Novas and the Shapeshifter. I've just never been a big fan of the muted feel on the Proline Energy S, but that's a very personal preference type thing. But, you know, this list is kind of personal preference, so I'm going to keep it in the B tier. I don't feel like it performs quite as well as the other ones there. The Flash is, okay, so this is the start of the classic Gen 2 raw thermoform paddles. So Flash, DBD, Loco, these are all kind of similar. Like, they all play differently, but the construction is similar. I think I'm going to keep them in the B tier. I could put them in the C tier. The reason I have them higher than like the Carbon 1X, the Carbon 2X, the Filth, the Force, is because I think this hybrid shape, it's a little bit more maneuverable. It's also a little bit more controlled because it is wider. I don't know. It's tough to say they're better than the extended Gen 2 raw carbon thermoform paddles, but I do think they work for a wider variety of people. And I think at this point we have some really, really good elongated paddles that are going to be in the S tier that just kind of render these slightly obsolete, I guess you could say. So I'm going to keep these in the B tier. The Control Air Epic, yeah, I'm going to move it into the A tier. I always say it's one tier lower than the Invicta because you have so much control with the Invicta, and because of this hole there in the middle, it's so maneuverable. I don't really see a point in going for the Epic, but if you do like that shorter shape, you know, it plays very similarly to the Invicta, just a little bit less power and spin. The Black Diamond, I think, is a fantastic paddle. Fiberglass, for those of you who don't know, I'm a big fan of it. I find it adds kind of a juicy feel element to the paddle. Makes it a little bit poppier, I guess. A little bit. Like, there's really not that big of a difference, but control is still great here. So, similar to the DBD. The Flow, I was a huge fan of this paddle when it first came out. It has a similar feel to the other Gen 2 raw carbon thermoform paddles. It just has a slightly different shape that I really like. It's the same length, but it feels a little bit more like an elongated paddle the way it swings through the air, but it still has that maneuverability because it's a little bit shorter, so I'm a big fan of that paddle. J2K Pro, yeah, to me, I don't get the benefits in Kevlar with the J2K Pro, the same Kevlar benefits that I get with the J2K. The Pro weave is a little bit firmer, so it almost feels more like a classic Gen 2 thermoform paddle. So that's why I got J2K Pro, J3K Pro, J7K Pro, kind of all on that same tier as the classic Gen 2 thermoform paddles. Okay, the Pulsar FXs. So all three I've got here, you can see, R3, R1, R2. I don't think the Pulsar FXs are quite as impressive as the Novas. They have more of that technology that softens them up, but because of that, they don't have quite the same top-end power, and I don't find them to be quite as spin-friendly either. So I'm more impressed with the R1 or with the Novas than with the Pulsars, but honestly, they're very, very good paddles. These are some of the best control paddles right now because they are a little bit softer. So yeah, good paddles. I'm just not going to move them higher than B tier. Definitely not lower than B tier though. Yeah, the Hirachi X Control, like, I didn't find the Hirachi paddles to be that impressive. I don't think blue Kevlar performs as well as red Kevlar. Now, I don't have any empirical data to back that up. It could just be full waffle, but I don't get as much spin here. I don't get as much feel. It's a little bit more muted. So yeah, I just don't get quite the same premium playability that I get with the Ruby and the J2K with the Hirachi X Control, which is why I have it B tier. The Pro Air Invicta, In terms of performance, it's probably a C tier paddle, but because it has such a unique feel that I actually really like, that fiberglass feels a little bit more, I don't know, it just provides a little bit more feedback. It's kind of tough to describe, but if you like that feel, there's really not much else that can compete. So B tier, I think, is where I'm going to put it. But yeah, it's just a different paddle to the rest here. Okay, the Shogun. So I'm actually going to this nerdy tourney, the bread and butter event that they're hosting there down in Florida. I'm going there in a couple weeks. And the requirements, the only thing we have to do is play with a bread and butter paddle. And I'm trying to figure out which one I want to play with. I've never been the biggest fan of the Shogun. I don't love the feel of titanium. Quick little pause here. I call these quote unquote titanium paddles for the rest of this tier list. I know it's not actually titanium, it's PET, electroplated fiber. Just for simplicity, I guess I still call it titanium, but no, there's no titanium in the Shogun, there's no titanium in any of the paddles that I say titanium for during this tier list. So I just wanted to correct that real quick. And I do find this paddle kind of lacks spin, and it's really clunky. That's why I've got it in the B tier. Now I'm definitely going to test it a lot more over the next couple of weeks to see if this is the one I'm going to play with, but I don't think it is. I think I'd rather play with the Filth, even though I technically have it in a tier lower. The reason I've got the Shogun in a tier higher than the Filth is that titanium blended into the top sheet does add a little bit more pop. I guess it's a little bit more special than raw carbon, but I would rather play with a raw carbon paddle over a titanium paddle. But again, I mean, I'm kind of contradicting myself saying that this is a personal preference type thing, but there are certain performance benefits you just can't deny with the Shogun, mainly in terms of control and power just being a little bit better. But yeah, I'm not going to move this into the C tier because of that. The Mach 1 Forza, Mach 2 Forza, I know these were super, super popular paddles for a very long time. Their spin is impressive. That was kind of the main thing. But at this point, there are paddles that are more spin friendly than these. And then other than that, they're kind of traditional Gen 2 raw carbon thermoform paddles, which are definitely limited in their playability at this point. They are a little bit standard, I guess you could say. And I don't think C tier, like obviously C tier doesn't look great. It's not bad. None of these are bad paddles. I'm just looking at them. One of them is kind of mid, but like I would gladly play with all of these paddles except for the Baller Plus if I had to. So Mach 1 Forza, Mach 2 Forza, just C tier paddles, solid, just nothing too special. Same kind of goes with the Carbon 1X and the Carbon 2X. Yeah, C tier, they just don't have quite as much top end playability as some of the others. The Filth is very similar. It's not the same as the Carbon 1X, Carbon 2X, but I mean, they are very, very similar paddles. And this will probably end up being the paddle I play with for the Nerdy Tourney, just because I have it in the C tier. Again, doesn't mean I think it's bad. Same goes with the Force. This is honestly very similar again to the Carbon 1X and the Filth. The Hirachi X Control is kind of like, Control Plus is kind of like the Control without the Kevlar. Kevlar is technically a little bit better. Honestly, between these two, I'm not a big fan of them, but I still put the Kevlar one a little bit higher. The Baller Plus, I think the reason I put it in the same tier as these before is because I do think it's a little bit better than the Striker and the Wizard, just because it has a more standard shape, so it'll work for more people, and the thickness is in between the Striker and the Wizard, so it can work for more people. But at this point, I mean, there's really no reason to go for any of these three paddles, I would say. The tennis brands should be doing better, let's be honest. They're not bad, just not, on the level of the rest of the industry right now. The Prism Flash. So this is, just a classic paddle, raw carbon paddle. At this point, it's dated. It doesn't have the same spin as thermoform paddles. It is a little bit softer, so control is good. And some people still swear by paddles like these. But, in terms of performance, they're just not remarkable in any way, which is, I think, where D tier should go. Like, I would rather play with all these C tier paddles. The Radical X Raw, Radical Tour X Raw, I think it's called. It's pretty good. It is a raw it is a thermoform paddle, but there's something missing with this, especially in the spin department compared to the other ones. Just not quite on the same level, so I got it in the D tier. And then the Quartz. Look, this was a cool concept, cheap unibody paddle, but it doesn't perform any better than the Prism Flash and the Prism V7. Actually, I would rather play with the Prism Flash and the Prism V7 over the Quartz. But yeah, that's the reorganized list. And obviously I wanted to talk about these paddles just quickly before getting into the new ones. Quickly, I don't know how quickly that was. But now let's get into the new paddles. And I'm very excited for this because there's some awesome paddles here. All right, so we're starting with the Prism Bloom, which In all fairness, it's not the most exciting paddle to start with. But, you know, there's something to talk about here is that new bloom shape from Vatic Pro, which is similar to like the Fat Boy and a few other paddles on the market now. But there's just no reason to put it any higher than the Prism Flash and the Prism V7. That wider shape is going to give you a bigger sweet spot, obviously, a little bit more control, very maneuverable because it's short. You know, pick between these three in terms of what you prefer from the shape. Okay, now let's move on to some slightly more exciting paddles here. The Pro Ultimate Power. Okay, so this replaces the Pro Power Elongated, which is getting sunset on July 1st, which was for me, it was the first foam power paddle that I played with, and I was completely blown away because, you know, the power is the main thing, but also the spin is better than anything else because spring effect also adds spin onto the ball. But the big thing for me with these foam paddles was because they're foam, they're a little bit softer, they provide some insanely good feel. So even if they do spring the ball out, you can use that feel to control the ball. That Pro Power Elongated was an S tier paddle for all of last year. Obviously the Pro Power Elongated, they had a problem, it was too powerful. That's why it's getting sunset. That's why a lot of those paddles are getting sunset. They did tone the power down on the Pro Ultimate Power. The problem I have is they did it by kind of muting the feel. Like there's not that springiness anymore, and that springiness was part of that feedback that was so positive. And I don't love the feel on the Pro Ultimate Power. I do find it, that mutedness, to take away from that little extra feel is what you need to control these paddles. So I do think there are better foam power paddles than the Pro Ultimate Power. And when I compare it directly to the Pro Ultimate, the only difference between these paddles is thickness. The Pro Ultimate is definitely a little bit muted too, but because it's softer, you get that longer dwell time, you can control it a little bit easier. And to be honest, I've never had a problem with power on the Pro Ultimate. So I do think it's a slightly more well-rounded paddle. So I'm gonna put the Pro Ultimate Power in the A tier. Now let's move on. The Honolulu Pickleball J2 Ti. So very similar to the J2K, just a different top sheet. And here the real question between the J2K and the J2 Ti is going to be, do you prefer the really nice kind of plush feel of Kevlar, or do you prefer the slightly more muted feel of titanium? The feel is the big difference between these two. In terms of performance, they're very similar, so I'm going to put them in the same tier, J2K and J2 Ti. Okay, so the Pro 4 series is kind of similar to the Pro Ultimate Power series in that they replace paddles that have been or will be delisted because they were too powerful. And the Pro 4 series is definitely less powerful than the Mod TAs, than the 3S, and then the Gen 3s. So good there. Now the way they've made them less powerful is they have a little bit less spring effect, a little bit less dwell time. They do feel a little bit more firm, and it's just a little bit more solid. And because of that, they're claiming massive durability benefits. Obviously, durability is a huge was a huge problem, hopefully was, with foam power paddles. The Perseus Pro 4, we haven't had any issues yet in terms of durability. Now it's obviously only been in the store for about a month, but this is for me an easy S tier paddle, as will be a lot of the foam, a lot of the paddles from this series. It's exactly what it was supposed to be. Less powerful, still insanely powerful. Amazing, amazing spin. I still maintain the fact that I think spin is the most impressive thing on these foam power paddles, and the feel is excellent. The feel, because it's a little bit more of a solid paddle than the previous ones that it's replacing, I think the feel is a little bit better. Like I'm more confident in the control game with these paddles, and that's not because they're less powerful, it's because the feel is a little bit better. So yeah, just fantastic paddles. The Agassi Pro, okay, so this is obviously a very similar construction to the Pro 4s, but this paddle is less powerful than the Pro 4 Perseus. Now, I don't know what it is, but it is more controlled than the Perseus Pro 4. And beyond that, I do think this shape is a little bit more, it goes through the air a little bit quicker. Like I know this is kind of a funky looking paddle, but don't let that deter you from playing with it. This shape it feels very normal when you're actually on court with it. It is just a little bit quicker, a little bit more maneuverable. But the big thing is that this is more controlled than the Perseus Pro 4. So go for this one if you want a really good controlled power paddle. You know, it's still going to have that spring effect. The the dangers of spring effect will forever exist. And actually now is probably a good time to just caveat this with, these are risky paddles to play with. They spring the ball every single time you make contact. So if you're in the kitchen dinking, you are susceptible to pop-ups if you're not careful, but this one is just a little bit less susceptible to pop-ups than the Pro Force. Okay, the Pro Invicta, so the Vanguard Pro Invicta. Now this replaces the, I don't even remember what they're called, the raw carbon Invicta that was just a Gen 2 thermoform paddle, but it was softer than like the Carbon 1X, Carbon 2X. I think I would have had them in the B tier. I am gonna put this paddle into the A tier. It's a lot more impressive than those more standard Gen 2 thermoform paddles that it replaces. The construction is a little bit similar to the Shapeshifter. If you look at the top sheets, like we're not gonna zoom in right now, but it has that kind of triaxial carbon weave, I think is what Chorus calls it on the Shapeshifter. It's different on the Pro Invicta, but that weave definitely feels a little bit more plush, which gives you more dwell time to grab and spin the ball, and obviously more plush means more control in the soft game. Not quite as soft as the Control Air Invicta, but yeah, better paddle than these in the C tier. I would play with this any day if I wasn't, given the option of playing with a foam power paddle. So very good paddle, especially if you like control. All right, the Honolulu Pickleball J2 Ti Plus. Okay, I'm just gonna put the J2K Plus in there with it. Again, the difference between these paddles is super minimal. It's the same difference between the J2K and the J2 Ti, where the J2 Ti Plus is a little bit more muted than the J2K Plus, so a little bit less powerful, a little bit better controlled. But these are the Plus paddles, and the Plus paddles from Honolulu Pickleball have that Gen 3 foam construction. So they break in, they get a lot more powerful than the standard J2K and J2 Ti Plus, but they also have that really soft feel where that long dwell time, not soft, springy in long dwell time, but they have that long dwell time that you can kind of control the paddles with, and a lot more power and more spin than the J2K and the J2 Ti Plus. Now, I'm gonna put these in the S tier. One thing I will say is these are not quite as powerful as the Pro Ultimate, the Perseus Pro 4, the Agassi Pro, and some of the other paddles that we're going to talk about here. Now, to be fair, I haven't broken them into their maximum power point, but because of that very awesome, foam feel that I keep harping on about, and the fact that they are more powerful than a standard paddle, they're, to me, easy S tier paddles. And what's cool about the J2K and the J2 Ti Plus is that they're hybrid shaped paddles, which not many foam power paddles have come out as hybrid shaped paddles. So that gives you a very good option in that category. So great paddles. All right, the Saga V7. I actually have no idea where I'm gonna put this paddle, but the way you should look at the Saga is, it's not like the Prism line because it has a much more kind of premium solid feel, but the Sagas are similarly soft. So control is excellent, but the Sagas have a little bit more of that power. Now, you do have to swing really hard to get that power. The swinging really hard to get power is another, actually on the next paddles, on the Genesis paddles, it's something we're gonna talk about there. It's not like instantaneous pop on the Sagas. They're not very poppy paddles. They are soft. They're more soft than they are powerful, if that makes sense. But once you do, swing hard, activate that subtle spring effect, you get a lot more power than on something like the Prisms. So these are much better versions of the Prisms. It's kind of the way I want to put it. Now, whether I put them in the B tier or the A tier, no, I don't think these are not B tier paddles to me. They're A tier because they're more unique than a lot of the paddles in the B tier, because they have that kind of activation that you get to. So they're really nice for control in the soft game, and then when you do want to tap into more power, they're really good. Now, looking at a Saga compared to a Perseus Pro 4 is actually a really good comparison to make, because the Perseus Pro 4, it has spring effect at all times. So even, like I said, even when you're dinking, you're going to be susceptible to a pop-up because the spring effect is always there. Now, that means the pop is insane, but the flip side is, again, you need to be extremely careful. With the Saga, the spring effect doesn't kick in until much later. So you don't have that same pop, but you also don't have that risk factor in the soft game, which for a lot of people is really important. So that's the key element there picking between these paddles. I am just going to quickly put the Saga Flash here. The top end power isn't as high on the Sagas as on the foam power paddles either, but these have a really important role to play in the industry. And we're going to talk about two paddles right now, actually, that are similar to the Sagas, but I think a little bit better. Now, between the Sagas, I think at this point, everybody knows the drill with the V7 shape versus the Flash shape. The Flash is a hybrid paddle, so a little bit more maneuverable. The V7 is a standard elongated paddle, so a little bit more leverage for power and spin. I just go for whichever shape you prefer, and at this point I think everybody kind of knows which shape they prefer. Okay, the Genesis paddles. Oh no, I got it here. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the Genesis design in general first, and then I'll kind of order them how I think they should be ordered. But okay, if you watch my review of these paddles, you know I was not a fan. They weren't bad. Like, obviously they're not bad, they weren't bad paddles. And I said that, they're still very good paddles, but I was not particularly impressed. So obviously, yeah, the Genesis, if you don't know, have that true foam core. It's full foam, but it's very different foam to what you'll find in these foam power paddles. It's not really a springy foam. Like, you don't get that like trampoline effect that you get from something like a Perseus Pro 4 or Pro Ultimate, which I was super excited by, because soft without spring effect gives you that dwell time, and in theory should give you that feel. The problem I had with the Genesis paddles when I first tested them is it felt like I was just punching into a pillow that had nothing backing it up. So the feel was mushy, muted. I really didn't like the feel. I was completely lost in the sweet spot. Like, to me, there wasn't really a sweet spot. But I also, people that I trust a lot, like Chris Olsen from Pickleball Studio, were harping on about them. And so I messaged him and I was like, what is it that you like about these paddles? Because I can't figure it out. And he got back to me and he was like, look, I kind of agreed at first, these paddles weren't that impressive, but then I added lead tape and it transformed them. And I was like, okay, I kind of, I'm of the opinion that you shouldn't require lead tape to drastically improve a paddle. But you know what? He told me, like, trust me on this, it makes a huge difference. I added lead tape. I added a lot of lead tape. And I mean, transformation. I'm not kidding when I say these might be my go-to paddles right now. Like, a customized True Foam Genesis might be my go-to paddle. How did lead tape transform it so much? I don't know. But one thing I will say, why not release these with the swing weight that I got with lead tape? Like, it's not an unmanageable swing weight. It's still a lower swing weight than the Pro Ultimate, for example. And the improvements, they're everywhere. So the number one biggest improvement is lead tape feels like it adds some friggin' backbone to the paddle, which was so lacking. Like, I don't know, there was nothing to the paddle. And then the lead tape, it just like firms up, boom, it just punches into the ball and you get this like really nice feel, actually. And obviously they're super soft. So these are, like, I think the best control paddles right now. I would 100% pick these over the Control Air Invicta, again, with lead tape, just because they're actually softer, they have a bigger sweet spot, they're more consistent, and they're pretty powerful and insanely spin friendly. The soft spin game is insane. The top end spin game, when you're hitting big ground strokes, phenomenal as well. So I was really blown away by how much better they got with lead tape. And the power, which I thought was really lackluster at first. Again, it's not a spring effect type of foam, but that improved with lead tape as well. Now, power does go up with lead on any paddle, but on these ones in particular, I feel like there was a bit of spring effect at times without lead tape, like once I was swinging really, really big, kind of like what I was saying with the Sagas. But because the lead tape applies more force onto the ball, you kind of tap into that spring effect earlier. So still not really poppy paddles. Like, if you're just compact strokes up at the net trying to, hit power out of nothing, you don't really get that on the Genesis paddles. But top end power, yes. So incredible control, incredible spin, very, very good power. These to me are the best control paddles right now on the market, and all three are going easily into the S tier, with the caveat that you need to add lead tape. All right, so the Paddletech Bantam TKOC. Now, obviously this paddle had a ton of hype when it first came out, because it was unique because it kind of came out around the same time that these foam power paddles came out, but this was like a stiff power paddle, and it was extremely powerful, still is one of the most powerful paddles on the market right now, but it didn't have that soft, springy element. So a lot of people who like that firmer feel really like the feel of this. Ironically, not a thermoform paddle. The problem I have with this paddle is that there's two things. One, I don't think its spin is high enough to control its power on top end, like on big ground strokes and on serve. And the other thing is, because it doesn't have that long dwell time, you don't feel like you can control it as well as the other extremely powerful paddles that do have that long but springy dwell time. So I can't put this paddle in the S tier. And I know this is going to be a little bit controversial because a lot of people like it a lot, but the thing with these foam power paddles is there is a way of kind of eliminating their risk factor. Is if you can use their dwell time to your advantage, you actually can control them. And that you just don't necessarily have that with the Bantam TKOC. So that's why I'm not going to put it in the same tier as those paddles. Okay, the Pro Ultimate Hyper, or the Pro Ultimate Hyper is going in the same tier as the Pro Ultimate. It's a 16 millimeter paddle, so it doesn't have that same issue of control that I said on the Pro Ultimate Power has. And this is actually a really unique paddle. Like, there are some paddles with this shape that are super powerful, but the shorter shape plus the power and spin you get from the foam is really awesome. Again, a little bit more muted than a paddle we'll talk about later, but fantastic. The Pulse V, okay, well that's another paddle with very similar shape to the Pro Ultimate Hyper. The Pulse V, when I first tested them, I thought they were like a little bit standard. Obviously these paddles break in fantastically. John Q called it the Goldilocks stage, which 100% accurate. That's exactly what I would call it. And they stay at that Goldilocks stage for a very long time. Yeah, once you do break it in, it gets much softer, much more powerful. And because it's softer and more powerful, you know, it kind of taps into that spring effect that you get right off the bat with these types of paddles here. So I love the Pulse series. And because they're not quite as powerful to begin with, they're also not as powerful as, you know, super powerful paddles once you do break them in, but they're also way more controlled. So they're easier paddles to play with. And I think I had these ranked number 5 in my top 5 power paddles video from a few weeks ago. But they're also the ones that I said most people should try if they want an introductory power paddle, just because they don't have quite as much of that difficulty element. So I'm going to put all of these in the S tier. These are all S tier paddles for sure. I'm just quickly going to talk about the different shapes, but you kind of know the drill here. The Pulse V is that shorter shape with the long handle, so super maneuverable, and then, yeah, a little bit less leverage for power and spin compared to the longer ones. The Pulse X, it's just a standard elongated shape, so yeah, not too much else to say there. You kind of know the drill with standard elongated shapes. The Pulse E, yeah, okay, you know what? This one I am actually going to put in the A tier because it's so powerful and so spin friendly already that you just don't need to go longer. The Pulse S is the one that most people are going to go for because it's kind of a blend of the you know, it's a hybrid paddle, so blend of power and spin that you get from the extended or the elongated shape, and then the slightly better maneuverability that you get from the shorter shape. So yeah, those are excellent paddles. Okay, the Control 1 Forza and Control 2 Forzas. Now, these are obviously Kevlar versions of the Mach 1 Forza and Mach 2 Forzas. The problem I had with these paddles is similar to the problem I had with the Hirachi X Control. The different colored Kevlar, it does not feel as good as the J2K and the Ruby. Point blank, it just does not feel as premium. I don't get as much spin, and yeah, I just don't think these can go in the same tier as the Ruby and the J2K. And I was really disappointed, especially by the Control 1 Forza, because there aren't that many elongated Kevlar paddles, unfortunately. I don't know why, but it just wasn't quite on the level of these red Kevlar paddles. So good paddles. Do I think they're better than the Mach 1 Forza and Mach 2 Forza? Yeah, a little bit. Like, I do think that Kevlar still gives that slightly more plush element, a little bit more spin as well, and it, you know, pops the ball out a little bit harder too, but not enough to put them 2 tiers above the Mach 1 Forza and Mach 2 Forza. Okay, the Saga Bloom. Yeah, similar kind of thing as the other 2 Sagas, just the same shape as the Prism Bloom that we already talked about. So if you want a little bit more control, slightly bigger sweet spot, this is a fantastic control paddle because it is a little bit softer and it is wider and easier to control. It's kind of like the Fat Boy in a way, but much softer. Oh yeah, the Neonic Flow Prime X. Yeah, the difference between this and the standard Neonic Flow is this has a little bit of fiberglass. Now, I've already talked about this. I'm a huge fan of fiberglass, the way it feels in a pickleball paddle. Basically, this paddle is just going to be a little bit more powerful than the standard Flow, but it's not a huge difference, and it is a little bit less controlled because of that. Now, I would prefer to play with the Prime X just because I like the feel of the paddle a little bit more, but it is not measurably or significantly better than the Flow. So I'm gonna put it in the same tier as the Flow, which I think is the B tier. Yeah, it's right there. So yeah, B tier paddle. Okay, the Scorpius Pro 4. Obviously, I'm putting this paddle in the S tier. It's that Scorpius shape that I think, you know, a lot of people love this shape. This is one of the few super powerful foam paddles that is short. And kind of like I was saying with the Pulse V, is you get tons of power and spin just inherently from this core design. Obviously less than the longer paddles, but it's already so high that the benefits and maneuverability might actually be better for a lot of people. Now, one thing you will never get with a short paddle is the same swing feel as an elongated paddle, and that's the reason why I struggle so much to play with shorter paddles. And it's not even that I struggle to play with them. I play with them fine, but when I go back to an elongated paddle, I just feel more at home. But it's not a worse paddle, if that makes sense. It's still great. It's got that really, really good power, you know, obviously slightly lower power than the older Scorpius, Gen 3 Scorpiuses. Scorpiuses? I don't know. But slightly better control, more solid feel, and should be more durable too, which is really good, obviously. Okay, the Shapeshifter EX. Yeah, it has that shapeshifter technology, which we've already talked about is fantastic. You know, I am going to put it in a tier lower than the Shapeshifter. I think that hybrid shape complements that but then I got the Pro Invicta in there. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, you could put this in the same tier as the Shapeshifter. I do think I would pick the Shapeshifter over the Shapeshifter EX, which kind of goes against the way I usually feel about longer paddles, but I do think the Shapeshifter is just a little bit more special, especially that spin, because it's a little bit shorter. That soft spin game is so good because you can kind of like just whip the paddle through contact really easily. You don't get that quite as much with the Shapeshifter EX, and I think that's one of the big benefits to playing with the Shapeshifter is that soft spin game is some of the best you can find. And the Pro Invicta compared to the Shapeshifter EX, like these are actually quite comparable paddles. I do think there's something Selkirk just does better than a lot of other brands is feel. Like this has a slightly more premium feel than the Shapeshifter EX, so I am going to put it in the A tier. Like I would pick the Invicta over the Shapeshifter if I'm going to pick an elongated paddle with this design. So yeah, B tier paddle. Oh, the Olympus. Oh, I forgot about this paddle. If you watched that video where I talked about the customization I did to the Olympus, it might be my favorite paddle right now. What's cool about the Olympus is it has a similar amount of power to all these foam power paddles, like the really powerful foam power paddles, but it's firm, kind of like the Bantam. Unlike the Bantam, I think this has a much more premium feel. Like it feels more solid, more consistent. So I struggle less to control it because of that. Like the Bantam to me it feels a little bit ambiguous sometimes. This never ambiguous, always powerful, always poppy, always at risk of a pop-up, but solid and consistent, which is super important if you're going to play with a powerful paddle. And I also think if you do that customization that I talked about in that video where I went into a little bit more depth on the Olympus, you get a softer feel, so a little bit better control, but you still get obviously huge power, and it also has so much spin, like top end spin. The soft spin game is definitely not the best here because it is firmer, and soft spin is just a really subtle kind of brush up on the ball, and you don't want it to go too deep and all that. But really unique paddle. Easy S tier paddle for me. Like if you want to dominate your opponent kind of all around the court with power being the primary part of your game, the Olympus is one of the best paddles right now. You probably want to try that more than you want to get involved in like long dinking rallies because it is susceptible to pop-ups. But yeah, if you have a power-oriented game and you like hybrid paddles, this is the cream of the crop right now. And the feel is just phenomenal. Like such nice feel, so connected to the ball. I love that paddle. Okay, the Invader. Now, again, back to that nerdy tourney thing. I was excited to talk about the bread and butter paddles in this video because I kind of want to talk myself into a specific one. And the Invader is a phenomenal paddle. Like really a great paddle. I'm just going to slot it in the A tier right now because I think that's where I want to put it. But it has that titanium feel, so it is a little bit more muted, but I actually think this is my favorite feeling titanium paddle just because it doesn't, I don't feel like it's quite as muted, and I feel like the spin is like way better than the Shogun, for example. Like there does seem to be a different, I don't know, maybe they used a slightly different weave. It's a different color. I'm a little bit weird about colors, but it does back up my theory that different colors make different feels. Yeah, great spin, a little bit more plush for control compared to something like the Loco or the DBD. Pretty good power as well. So yeah, I'm gonna put it in the A tier. It's kind of like the Ruby and the J2K, where it's just a little bit more special than the standard raw carbon thermoform paddles, especially on the control side of things. Do I think I'm going to use this paddle at the nerdy tourney? No, I'm probably going to use the Filth. I just feel like it would take me longer to get used to the Invader than the Filth. Like I can, even though I don't think these are as, special in terms of performance, they're very standard. So they're easy to play with. The Invader, there would be a few quirks I'd have to get used to, mainly that slightly more muted feel of the titanium. Okay, and the Hyperion Pro 4 to finish things off. I mean, not too surprising where I'm going to put it. S tier. It's an S tier paddle. It's just a slightly different shape to the Perseus Pro 4. The Hyperion shape has always been my favorite shape from Yola, especially with the foam construction, like the Gen 3 foam construction and now the Gen 4 foam construction. It's a little bit less powerful because there's a little bit less mass at the top of the paddle there. So it doesn't push the ball quite as deep, and it's more maneuverable, so a little bit more spin. And to be honest, like the fact that it's less powerful, I think, is a good thing because power is so high on these. You don't really need to go pushing the limits. So I would play with the Hyperion over the Perseus. That maneuverability is a big, like really awesome, especially up at the net, but also from the baseline when you want to hit a spin shot. I kind of prefer the feel of this Hyperion shape through the air. So yeah, easy S tier paddle. So that's the end of the tier list. Unfortunately, I have a feeling this is going to be like a 50-minute video. Hopefully not that long. Let's hope I can cut it down to 40, but kind of doubt that. But there were a lot of paddles to talk about, so what can I say? Yeah, tons of good paddles. Obviously, this is a pretty full S tier. A lot of them are kind of repeats, different shapes of a similar design. But yeah, there's definitely been a shift in the industry since the last tier list, mainly because we can actually include the foam power paddles in this. They are great paddles, no doubt about it. Obviously they are, I keep talking about that element of risk that you have when you play with them, but that risk is mitigatable, if that's a word. And they do perform just better than most in terms of power and spin. So that's, big factor that goes into making these tier lists. I think, I'm gonna keep saying it, I think we could do with more control paddles in the industry, but I also understand from a marketing point of view, it is kind of harder to sell a control paddle now. Like brands are going to be pushing R&D into this more powerful design because it does sell better and it does play really well, no doubt about that. There are good control paddles, like that's why I got the controller Invicta there and why I got the Pro Invicta there and the Sagas and the Pulses and the True Foams. Those are all great control paddles. So they exist, but definitely power is the main focus right now. But yeah, a lot of cool paddles are coming. We did kind of have a lull in the past month or so, which is why you haven't seen that many reviews. But yeah, lots of cool stuff is coming. But yeah, that is going to be the end of this tier list. Thank you so much for watching. Again, remember, if you do want to demo any of these paddles, you can come visit us in store. Or if you want to buy them, you can go online at racketsandrunners.ca.